In the endless reaches of the universe, there once existed a planet known as Krypton. There, civilization was far advanced and had brought forth a race of supermen whose mental and physical powers were developed to the absolute peak of human perfection. But there came a day when giant quakes threatened to destroy Krypton forever. One of the planet's leading scientists, sensing the approach of doom, placed his infant son in a small rocket ship and sent it hurtling in the direction of the Earth just as Krypton exploded. The rocket ship sped through star-studded space, landing safely on Earth with its precious burden, Krypton's sole survivor. As the years went by and the child grew to maturity, he found himself possessed of amazing physical powers, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
What the hell is that?
Easy, miss. I've got you.
The infant of Krypton is now the Man of Steel, Superman!
Doomed planet. Desperate scientists. A last hope. A kindly couple. It's a story we all know. Superman, the archetypal superhero, keystone of American mythology, the originator of modern pop culture. We know the character came from the planet Krypton, but the Superman story originated from somewhere far closer to home, with two aliens from Cleveland, Ohio. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were both the sons of Jewish immigrants who'd fled anti-Semitic persecution in Europe at the turn of the century. Their first comics for DC, National Allied Publications at the time, were drawn on the back of brown wrapping paper and scrounged wallpaper offcuts, which were approved, although Shuster had to borrow money to buy proper drawing paper for his following issues. After two attempts at original characters, their third creation, Superman, debuted in Action Comics #1 in June of 1938. Less than a decade after a crippling financial depression and with a ballooning fascist movement in their ancestral Europe, Siegel and Shuster countered Nazi propaganda with a story of their own. They took the traits of the fascist Aryan man and inverted it. Their Übermensch had the same power, the same strength, but used it to help those without. I agree with Grant Morrison's take that Superman is a socialist idea, dispensing a wealth of power to the greatest number for the highest good.
Obviously, none of you can be trusted with guns, so I'm going to take them away from you.
Which included threatening Hitler with a strictly non-Aryan sock on his jaw.
It's men like you that make it difficult for people to understand one another.
Like them, Superman was an immigrant, an alien raised in working-class America, his ancestral home destroyed forever, but never forgotten. He was a standard for a lost culture in the new world of melting pot America. As well as its history, Jewish folklore and religion were also foundational influences. Baby Superman's rocket was Moses' basket of reeds, sent to Earth by a heavenly father to become a New Age sun god. Clark Kent was his English name, but he had another, Kal-El, the equivalent of his Hebrew name, a spiritual title in an ancestral language. And like many a Jewish writer in America, Clark Kent would also choose himself an Americanized name, a new title for the strange world he found himself on: Superman. The end of the Golden Age was just the beginning for Jewish comic book writers. A new generation would expand the genre into the Silver Age, continuing to bake in Jewish history and culture. The heroes of the 60s were ostracized outsiders, put upon working-class men and women who never felt accepted by the mainstream. The anxiety of secret identities are born out of the feverish paranoia of anti-Semitism. To have an inborn identity that isn't always outwardly obvious, but could bring hatred and violence down on you if anyone ever found out, is a fear that's run through generations of Jewish history, now enshrined in comic book lore forever. It's a key feature of ableism too, which is how I relate to it, and I think that's why comics of the 60s, like the X-Men, feel applicable to so many minority groups. Some can't hide who they are, others are terrified of being found out, but this broad church of people are all part of the same group, united by a common struggle. The genre's origins in 30s anti-Semitism were free to broaden more generally in the 60s, allowing for contemporary interpretation by any group, whichever's the most timely. And that's true even now. Which, considering these origins, makes certain adaptations of Superman a little tasteless. Superman has struggled in modern adaptations for a while now. From films to video games to spin-off comics, he's been depicted as emotionally tortured, a fascist, an authoritarian, sometimes ideologically, sometimes just literally.
Comrades, I give you Superman!
A bad guy or anti-hero that must be taken down at all costs. Usually by Batman.
Darkness! No parents! First try.
The recent DC films are a little more complicated. The violence is a sticking point for a lot of people.
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Whatever it is, it's heading straight for the World Trade Center.
Great Caesar's ghost! Are you sure about this?
Yes, sir. Superman's turned into a real different person.
But not the main problem. Though Superman's not openly authoritarian, he is framed in a world where optimism is treated with scorn and where hope is a losing game.
When the planet was founded, it stood for something, Perry.
And so could you if it was 1938, but it's not 1938. Not in here, not out there. You dropped this thing.
But even that's not as bad as the Injustice video games.
Show me what a villain looks like. Is that what you want to see?
Christ, even the Brave and the Bold did it.
Earthquake!
Considering Siegel and Schuster wrote such an optimistic hero with origins in Jewish history and culture, a fascist Superman is in obscenely poor taste. Contemporary writers seem to have forgotten where the character came from, and why. As to why this misinterpretation is so common, I've diagnosed 3 possible reasons. Misreading the Aryan archetype. Storytellers seem to take his Ubermensch aspect at face value, not realising Superman was always a subversion of that, a figure who distributes his power to the people, rather than using it to dominate his enemies. Writers' contrarianism. Screenwriters are very adept at identifying what's been done before and immediately doing the opposite. We're all a bit like this, to be honest, but with Superman seen as a Boy Scout who saves lives, too quickly a contrarian writer jumps to asking, but what if, and stay with me, he doesn't?
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
I have no idea what he was talking about.
The power fantasy. There's a simple thrill in seeing a character doing impossible things. They allow us to put ourselves in their shoes and indulge the fantasy of wielding incredible power. Making statements about right and wrong is risky business for tentpole movies, and it's just easier to indulge in how good it must feel to fly. And that is entertaining, but is it doing us any good?
I have a feeling that the current tsunami of American superhero movies is really not doing our culture any good at all. And I would only note that 2016, 6 of the 12 biggest grossing films were superhero movies. This is bad news for culture. If we've got this infantilization, if we've got this refusal to grow up, a refusal to take responsibility for the adult world in which we all find ourselves taking part. And yes, this is a very complex world and it is scary. And none of us wants to admit that we are now the generation that is in charge of it. So we retreat. to these fantasies of empowerment. And I think that at the end of the day, they could fairly be described as white supremacist dreams of the master race.
And it is a very American legend, that the immigrant arriving in a new country,
It's
isn't it?
the American story. I mean, I know that because of Nietzsche, the Superman myth does lend itself very well to fascism, but it's worth remembering that during the Second World War, the Germans referred to Superman as Super Jew.
Right.
Because he'd been created by two Jewish guys from Cleveland, Siegel and Schuster. In the early comics industry, there were an awful lot of Jewish people there.
Yeah, and it's almost as if those European expatriates on the run from pogroms arrive in America, and the only way their only contribution to the war effort was being able to create these propaganda figures that in 4-color comic books would be fighting the Nazis.
Yeah, but they can't fight the Nazis.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like anybody can fight the Nazis, but they're going to invent somebody in a tight costume and a cape who can throw Hitler over the moon, you know.
We are living in powerless times, and Superman has been used as a fantasy to escape that, to roleplay a life without consequence. I don't think it's a mistake that Iron Man and Batman are the most successful properties right now. The character's as much a capitalist power fantasy as Superman is a socialist one.
No one knows what it's like to be the bad man.
Misapplied though it is, it's still a core component of the character, because in the end, it all comes down to power. Better YouTubers than me have made this observation before, but power doesn't always corrupt. Power always reveals. Give someone absolute power to do whatever they want, and you see who they really are. Superman is a character not intoxicated by power, but absolved by it. The fiction frees him of fear, of ego, of hunger, or desperation. This is why Superman always does the right thing. That's the real power fantasy of Superman. The dream that we were as free to do the right thing as he is. That's why in 1938 he is described as champion of the oppressed, the physical marvel who had sworn to devote his existence to helping those in need. Writers have been perpetually embarrassed by the third part of Superman's commitment to truth, justice, and the American way.
I believe in truth, but I'm also a big fan of justice.
I think because they assume it's a bit exclusionary for such a universal character, but Siegel and Schuster's parents came from countries like the Netherlands, Lithuania, or Ukraine, bearing names like Seglovich, Keuchels, and Catharsk. This was never an affirmation of blind patriotism, but of the promise of America. To many, a whole new world where an alien could build a new home. America didn't reward that optimism. Siegel and Schuster were paid only $130 for the character, but they weren't entirely wrong either. Far from their ancestral home though they were, Jerry and Joe would pour their culture and history into a character they'd send out into the world like a rocket ship, shooting through history to land here, 83 years later, jewel in the crown of American pop culture. Superman is ours now. Our job is just to remember what world he really came from.
You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you when the sun comes. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders.
What a life. I've traveled across time and space. I've seen and done things beyond imagination. Blessed with friends like Pete and Lana and Jimmy and Batman. What incredible adventures we've shared. What amazing people I've known. But Lois, I loved you most of all. And no matter how dark it seems, there's always a way.
Red kryptonite. Now that's the unpredictable stuff. It could turn you into bizarre forms and shapes. It could turn you into twins or a giant ant. Anything. One final word of warning. If the kryptonite is not properly and clearly labeled, take your business elsewhere. Thank you.